So this material is a passionate political commentary arguing that JD Vance's recent rhetoric regarding an Iran deal and foreign influence campaigns relies on anti-Semitic tropes, pandered.
Yeah, it's an inherently strong piece. You know, it has this deep passion and, really compelling historical parallels for sure.
Right. So let's just dive right into how we can make it bulletproof.
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
To start, let's look closely at the section discussing the Time magazine. The author uses it to highlight how Vance justifies his claims of a foreign influence.
Well, strengthening the initial teardown of the primary evidence makes the subsequent character analysis significantly more compelling.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
Yeah, the weakness here is that the material currently dismisses the Time magazine article as a nothing burger entirely too quickly.
Like it just kind of brushes right past it.
Exactly. It rapidly pivots to accusations of guilt by association with figures like Tucker Carlson and the Groypers.
Right.
And by rushing past the core evidence Vance is citing, the critique leaves a massive gap in the logical foundation.
So what's the fix there?
Well, the suggestion is to meticulously dismantle the claims made in the Time article on their own factual merits before exploring the underlying political motives, or the associated factions.
Oh, I see. So really get into the weeds of the facts first.
Right. So for a concrete example, before introducing Batia Ungar-Sargon's commentary, you'd add a dedicated paragraph directly contrasting Vance's claim of a literal foreign influence campaign with Brad Parscale's actual quote in the timepiece.
Because Parscale explicitly states the campaign was never meant to undermine the president's objectives.
Yes, you need to show the glaring gap between the actual text of the article and, Vance's spin on his podcast.
I can see what you're going for here, but let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
If we assume the listener's core audience already dislikes Vance's rhetoric, is it truly necessary to spend so much time debunking the article itself?
That is a very fair question.
I mean, most readers who click on a piece like this are already primed to believe the Time article's a nothing burger, just because the author says it is, right? It feels like the author wants to get to the juicy stuff as fast as possible.
It is incredibly tempting for a writer to skip the dry, factual analysis and sprint right to the ideological fireworks.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion? I mean, if we skip the factual teardown, we risk allowing critics to say the author's just launching ad hominem attacks rather than winning the factual argument.
So leaving a premise standing is incredibly dangerous in political commentary.
Exactly. We never want to give a critic an easy out. And plus, you have to think about the psychology of the reader.
Right. Even a sympathetic audience might secretly harbor doubts.
They might be reading the piece and wondering in the back of their minds, okay, but did the Time article actually uncover a massive conspiracy that I just haven't heard about?
Oh, wow. Right. You're saying that if you don't close that factual loop, the reader is distracted by it for the rest of the piece.
Yeah, you just haven't fully earned their trust yet.
So taking the time to show the primary evidence failing on its own terms is really...
It really is. I mean, when you bring in Brad Parscale's exact words, where he says, "I've never funded, organized, or participated in any effort to undermine President Trump ever," you neutralize the threat completely.
You aren't just saying Vance is wrong. You are using the very source Vance cited to prove him wrong.
That is an inescapable trap.
I see how that changes the architecture of the piece. You're taking away the foundational block of the opponent's argument.
Right, and once that block is gone, there is a massive factual vacuum.
And the reader naturally asks, well, if the article doesn't say what he claims it says, why is he lying about it?
Which seamlessly opens the door to the psychological and political analysis.
Exactly. You've earned the right to talk about pandering to the alt-right because you've proven the factual argument is a hollow shell.
Right. The transition into the guilt by association elements, like the Tucker Carlson orbit and the Groypers, suddenly doesn't feel like a partisan attack.
It feels like the only logical conclusion left on the table.
Precisely.
So once we ensure the factual foundation is solid, the next logical step is looking at the witnesses we bring in to support that foundation.
Yeah, because right now there's a vacuum after you strip away the factual cover.
Exactly. The reader is looking for who is right and how to make sense of the fallout. But the material makes a strong case by highlighting several secondary voices instead of just one strong thesis.
Well, streamlining the chorus of secondary voices sharpens the focus on the central argument.
Because currently, the author crowds the stage with a ton of different commentators to prove that conservatives are pushing back against Vance.
Right. The weakness here is that the script relies on a rapid-fire sequence of quotes from multiple commentators.
We get this massive avalanche of secondary voices.
Yeah, we hear from Insurrection Barbie, Mark Levin, Dana Lush, Joel Berry, and Elon Levy, all in incredibly quick succession.
It's a lot to take in at once.
It is, and this onslaught of back-to-back quotes dilutes the author's own authoritative analytical voice.
Not to mention, it creates a totally chaotic, choppy flow for the reader.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to consolidate the peripheral external quotes into a single overarching summary, reserving direct quotation only for the strongest, most structurally vital voices.
Okay, I see. So as a concrete example of how to fix this flow, you wouldn't read full, lengthy quotes from 5 different media personalities.
No, you would summarize the general conservative pushback in one single, punchy sentence.
Like, you could write something like, mainstream conservative voices immediately recognize the flaw here, noting that Israel isn't bombing Iran and hasn't interfered in U.S. elections.
Exactly. And then you dedicate the reclaimed space to a deep, uninterrupted dive into Batia Ungar-Sargon's Substack article.
Using her as your primary analytical anchor.
Yes, it is exactly like a courtroom trial.
Right. If a lawyer calls 15 minor character witnesses to the stand to say the exact same thing about the defendant, it actually distracts the jury.
They get bored and they lose the narrative thread completely.
And it completely dilutes the overwhelming impact of the lawyer's one-star expert witness.
Cognitive load is a very real factor when consuming this kind of political analysis.
Yeah, every time a new proper noun is introduced, like Insurrection Barbie or Joel Berry, the audience has to pause.
They have to identify who the person is, register their political leaning, determine their relevance to the current news cycle, and process their specific quote.
When you do that 5 or 6 times in a single page, the momentum of the essay just grinds to a halt.
The listener is no longer following the author's through line. They are just surviving a barrage of disjointed opinions.
It makes the author sound like a narrator reading a Twitter feed, rather than an expert guide synthesizing the political landscape.
Right. When you consolidate those voices into one summary sentence, you reclaim your authority.
You are telling the audience, I have done the homework. I have surveyed all the reactions, and here's the synthesized truth.
Which brings us to the star witness you mentioned earlier, Batia Ungar-Sargon.
Her analysis of Vance's motivations provides tremendous intellectual value.
Yeah, she introduces the concept of Occam's razor to explain his behavior.
So instead of weaving through a complex conspiracy about why Vance is saying, the simplest explanation is just his intense thirst for approval from a very specific vocal faction of the right.
Exactly. And currently, that incredible insight gets buried because it has to share real estate with 5 other minor takes.
If we clear out the underbrush, how deep should the author go into the Occam's razor?
I mean, I would spend 2 or 3 entire paragraphs on it. Just linger there.
Really explore how the author can use Occam's razor to dissect JD Vance's rhetoric?
Yeah. Unpack what that thirst for approval looks like mechanically.
Like, how does a politician signal to a fringe group without alienating the mainstream?
Exactly, by using the exact phrasing Ungar-Sargon identifies.
Giving her brilliant insights the breathing room they deserve really elevates the entire piece from a simple reaction essay into a sophisticated piece of political theory.
It really does. So by clearing away those extraneous voices and centering that really strong theoretical evidence, the material perfectly sets up its ultimate powerful conclusion.
Right, the historical context. But as I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the transition to the Baby Killers documentary needs some serious calibration.
Yes, building a deliberate, logical bridge between modern political rhetoric and historical prejudice ensures the conclusion resonates with maximum impact.
Because right now, there is a massive leap in scope. The author pivots from a 2024 political arena directly into a promotional segment about historical blood libels and a documentary on baby killers.
The weakness here is that the transition from JD Vance's political maneuverings regarding a memorandum of understanding directly to a documentary on the historical blood libel feels intensely jarring.
The material asserts that it's a playbook without clearly demonstrating the mechanical links between Vance's specific claims and those ancient tropes.
which risks alienating listeners who don't immediately see the underlying connection.
So, what's the best way to handle that transition?
Well, the suggestion is to explicitly map the specific rhetorical tactics used in the current event to the historical precedents mentioned in the outro before making the promotional pitch.
So, for a concrete example, you'd add a transitional paragraph explaining the actual architecture of these tropes.
Exactly. Explain that taking a tiny sliver of truth, like a standard mundane PR campaign, and exaggerating it into a sinister, shadowy global conspiracy of control is the exact same formula used for historical anti-Semitic libels.
You need to draw a direct, undeniable line between Vance's phrase about sinister forces at work and the fabricated evidence theme explored in the documentary.
That's fascinating, but, what are the potential limitations to that idea?
Like, is the connection between Vance's media complaints and ancient blood libels fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster so the audience doesn't get left behind?
Hold on, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Is it possible the author actually did establish that connection, but it's just assumed knowledge for their specific audience?
That's a fair point, because if I'm a casual reader, I'm definitely getting left behind when we suddenly jump from an Iran deal all the way back to medieval Europe and the pharaohs of Egypt.
But maybe the author's core audience inherently feels that connection without needing it spelled out?
I mean, the author clearly feels the connection in their bones, and a highly educated subset of their audience might feel it too.
They see the pattern.
But feeling the pattern and explaining the mechanics of the pattern are two completely different things in persuasive writing.
Right. If you want the piece to be shared, to be definitive, and to persuade people who aren't already entirely in your camp, you cannot rely on assumed knowledge.
You can't just tell the audience it's the same playbook.
No, you have to physically open the playbook, point to the page from 14th century Europe, and point to the page from yesterday's podcast, and show the reader that the text is identical.
Practically, that means we need to take the exact vocabulary Vance used, phrases like literal foreign influence and sinister forces, and mirror it directly against the script of the documentary, right?
Yes, we have to show the mechanism of the trope.
Right, highlight the mechanism itself.
The blood libel wasn't just a random, chaotic accusation. It was a very specific weaponization of fabricated, hyper-exaggerated claims to assign sinister global motives to a marginalized group.
It always starts with a grain of sand, like a mundane reality, that is then coated in layers of malicious fiction until it becomes a pearl of conspiracy.
When you take the time to explain that mechanism, the audience suddenly realizes, oh, Vance is taking a completely normal political disagreement over a memorandum of understanding and framing it as a shadowy, well-funded foreign subversion.
And once they see that mechanical similarity, the introduction of the documentary completely changes its nature.
It doesn't feel like a loosely related sponsor pitch or a jarring ad break anymore.
It feels like the necessary, mind-blowing conclusion to the entire essay.
It answers the ultimate so what of the piece.
Which is the holy grail of political commentary.
Right. Why does Vance's rhetoric matter? Why should the reader care about a random podcast interview?
It matters because it is utilizing a formula that has resulted in centuries of historical tragedy.
When you build that bridge carefully, step by step, the listener crosses it with you willingly.
They feel the immense weight of history crashing down on this modern political moment.
But if you force them to jump across the chasm without laying down those planks, they might just stay on the other side, viewing the documentary as an overreaction to a standard political squabble.
You have to earn the magnitude of that.
This is all incredibly actionable, and it really comes down to respecting the reader's journey.
Let's recap the 3 primary pillars we've constructed here today for the author to focus.
Sounds good.
First, factually dismantle the core evidence before moving to the character critique.
Right. Don't just call the Time article a nothing burger. Use Brad Parscale's own quotes to prove the math doesn't add up, leaving the opponent with nowhere to hide and stripping them of their factual cover.
Second, consolidate the minor supporting quotes to amplify your own authoritative.
Group the peripheral commentators into a single summary sentence so you can clear the stage and dive deep into your star witness, Batia Ungar-Sargon, really unpacking that Occam's razor analysis.
And third, build explicit, mechanical bridges between modern events and historical parallels.
Map the specific architecture of the rhetoric, how a mundane PR campaign is exaggerated into a shadowy conspiracy, so the audience easily crosses over to your powerful conclusion.
Implementing these structural shifts will take a piece that is already bursting with passion and turn it into something logically undeniable.
Building an airtight argument is a lot like building a bridge.
You secure the foundation first by dismantling their facts.
Then you clear the clutter of minor voices to build your own strong, load-bearing pillars.
And then finally, you lay down the historical context plank by plank so the reader can walk right across to your inevitable conclusion.
We highly encourage the author to apply these structural edits and submit the revised work back in for another critique.
We can't wait to see how this evolves.